Was it? Were you alive in 1978?
Well, I wasn't born yet, but yeah, sadly, sorry.
I think for me it was reading The Hobbit when I was probably 7 years old. Perhaps I read it at school. I can't remember who introduced me to it, but I was very captivated by it. I think it's just about Tolkien. I think it's to do with the struggle of the underdog. I think that's his sort of backbone throughout all his novels, and I think that's what makes them so popular. It's the little guy against the world. And I think just mentioning The Hobbit, I think that was the appeal for me as a child. And then Lord of the Rings I read shortly after that. And then I watched the 1978 animated movie, which I was absolutely obsessed by as a little boy.
For me, it was the films. It was Peter Jackson's films, and I'd seen them many years ago. And so when I was first approached and got to audition for this series, in my mind I thought, well, where do I fit into this story? You know, what type of character is it going to be? And I was excited because I felt like if you're going to bring the Lord of the Rings, you know, into the here and now, into the present day, I feel like you have a responsibility really to present Middle Earth the way the Earth is filled with, you know, people of different races and cultures and languages. And so it's represented in fantasy, but now we really get to show it on the screen. And our cast, you know, really does represent a mix of people from all over the world. The audience as well gets to watch it in different languages and experience it that way. So, you know, it's a really lovely thing to get to feel like I can see myself and I get to represent myself and my culture and my family and people I know in this story. So hopefully I get to be that for, you know, a 10-year-old that's watching this series for the first time and sort of spark their imagination, which is really cool.
For me, it was a little bit later than 1978.
Was it? Were you alive in 1978?
Well, I wasn't born yet, but yeah, sadly, sorry. But my introduction was the Peter Jackson trilogy, the movies, and then I think since then I just sort of, when I got this job, I just delved into the books, and they're fascinating and much different in a way, because my interpretation of Tolkien was sort of shaped by the films in the way that yours was kind of done in reverse.
Yes.
You had an interpretation of it,
yeah,
and then the movies are interpretation. It's its own thing, right?
Exactly.
And then it brings us onto this show, which is its own interpretation as well. And I think in a way that the movies were a gateway for me, I hope that this show is going to be a gateway to other young people watching the show.
Absolutely.
I mean, specifically about when I was first introduced to Tolkien, I was like 11 years old and I read The Hobbit. It was the first book I'd read on my own, and I obviously hadn't read anything like it. And it still stuck with me, the imagery there. And then seeing the films and reading some of the books. But then coming to this project, all of a sudden, it was all about the Second Age, and that was brand new to me, and the Silmarillion and things that Tolkien had written in his appendices. So it's quite astonishing, the depth and breadth of the man's imagination and how much he wrote in a lifetime, whilst also teaching, being a parent, publishing other things. It's just, how did he do it? So the scope is incredible, and I do feel that this is at this point in history, in terms of Amazon being the company that have given it the absolute support and love that is needed to try and bring Tolkien's imagination to life, combined with what we can do in terms of digital brilliance on this and the post-production values and the music. I just think this is exactly the right time to tell this story, let alone the fact that so much of it will be relevant to what's going on in our world. I mean, Tolkien's story will always be relevant, whichever point in history that you come.
He is, you're right. And Sauron, of course, is doing that. I think with Celebrimbor, I try to play it ambiguously so that you don't, that he's not quite sure what's happening to him. The audience shouldn't be either. I think it should be a mystery. But yes, he gets seduced. He gets wooed and charmed by Anatar, who promises him the world. Literally, he says, you know, I will give you everything if you work with me. And he does.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, the main aspect to their relationship at the end of season 1 and coming into season 2 is the trust. And trust built on shared grief, shared loss, shared experience. Oftentimes... Shared faith as well, of course. And I think, you know, sometimes you have an experience that is so intensive with someone, and it's like only the two of you really know what that that experience is. There's something even unspoken about it. And so when you sort of see them at the beginning of season two in Numenor, we start with the king's funeral because Miriel has also lost her father. So she's starting from a place of grief, as is Elendil. And they really are sort of leaning on each other, but it's a new dynamic to their relationship. In season one, it's leader and subject. And it's much more sort of, they know their roles and they're more defined. Season two, there's this really beautiful evolution of they trust each other in a time when there are very few people around them that they are able to trust, or at least, you know, in a way that they could before. So it's really sort of pushes their relationship, and ultimately they both have their individual journeys and individual challenges that ultimately they do have to face alone as well. But there's a beautiful relationship this season that I think the audience is really going to respond to.
I thought it's a great way to start, you know, the character as someone who's young, who's trying to find his way in the world. And I think Isildur himself doesn't really know what he is and who he is or who he could become. So I think season two, you finally get into that point where he needs to figure that out. It's survival mode. He fights monsters. He has to fight to survive. He has to learn who to trust. He falls in love. And with that, I think he becomes hardened, and he becomes someone that I think people who know Isildur, I think they would be, it's more in line with that interpretation. And at the end of season two, he has to make a decision. He has to make a decision between following his heart and his love versus his love for home. And that's the big sort of balance that he has to strike. And I found it quite an intriguing one.